Okay, so hello and welcome back to another episode of Grief Unedited. I am Karen Lafferty, I'm your host of this podcast, and Grief Unedited ultimately is a space where we have honest and real conversations about grief and loss. I'm an accredited counsellor, I specialise in grief, and I've worked with families and individuals for over a decade to help them navigate their journey through loss. If you want to connect with me, you can find me on Instagram and Facebook, and both of those are at Continuum Counselling, or I'm also on my website at www.continuumcounselling.com. Today's podcast is coming from a rather windy Scotland at the moment. We're in the middle of a weather warning. So Carrie, my lovely guest for today, and I are really hopeful that the internet holds out for long enough for us to get this episode recorded. But just to acknowledge if there is any background noise, apologies. We're doing our best that we can today. Also, just a shout to say that this podcast is purely for educational purposes, and any views that I express within it are my own, and they're not representative of any third parties that I work with or on behalf of. The last thing, just before we dive into today's episode, is just to acknowledge a bit of a content warning around the topic of grief. These conversations are real, they're unedited, that's the nature of our show, but we just want people to use viewer discretion. So if you're finding any of the content today triggering or just difficult in any sort of way, then please use your own judgment. Only listen if it feels helpful to you. And if you want to dip out for a bit, that's absolutely fine. So today's episode is called The Unexpected Teacher, and we've called it Lessons from Loss. And my guest today is the lovely Carrie, and we're going to dive in a moment to a conversation. And Carrie's going to talk a wee bit about her journey with her lovely mum, who sadly passed in 2006, following a journey with cancer that goes back probably over a decade. I think we were trying to count there. So today's episode is going to talk a wee bit about the journey that Carrie's been on in that time, and also a bit about what grief's been like for you. So, Carrie, I'm absolutely delighted that we're here and we're having this conversation. Do you want to tell us a wee bit about what your journey's been like with your mum, and also what her to introduce her? I'm just realising I don't know your mum's name, and I'd love to get to know her a wee bit.
Yeah, my mum was called Shona.
Shona, the
Yes,
lovely Shona.
and she was a primary school teacher.
Wow.
And yeah, she got in. It was about 10 years. I think it's hard to remember. I was still in secondary school, when she got her first diagnosis of bowel cancer, and she went into remission. So we were all very very happy.
Mm,
But in order to cure that, she had to get a large part of her bowel taken out. So I had a stoma, and it was when she was going back in to get her stoma reversed, and they cut her open to do that. They realised that she had cancer all over her liver and lungs.
it's spread.
So after that, it was quite quick, about 4 months, and
Mm,
she passed away. Um, so it was kind of a bit of a roller coaster, I'd say,
yeah.
because you go through that. Um, the difficulty of worrying in the first instance of her getting it, oh, is she going to die? And me and my two sisters were still very young, and I know people can lose a parent much younger than that, but um, yeah, and then the elation of her being
Yeah.
okay,
Yep.
and then always remember the phone call. I was living down in London, and I always remember her phoning to tell me that it
Oh
was back
gosh.
again, and
Right.
sorry,
Mm, yeah.
and how bad it was.
Wow.
And you thought, I don't know. It's funny how like your past memories automatically just they come rushing back in. It's
Yeah.
that sort of
Yeah.
panic and fear.
And the news that you never want to hear, but to hear
Hmm.
over a phone call as well must have been really difficult because I know London's not the other side of the world, but I can imagine it must have felt far from home at that point.
Hmm.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the first kind of lesson to talk about, because I was down in London, so I obviously wanted to come straight back to Glasgow,
Yeah. Yeah.
and she told me not to.
Oh wow, right, okay.
She said, "No, I don't want anybody changing anything. Like,
Right, okay.
uh, I was working as cabin crew, and it was something I always had wanted to do because I love
Mm,
traveling, and it was. it's difficult to get into. Well, it was. I don't know what it's like now, but back then it was difficult to get into in the interview process. It's very rigorous and intense, and um, yeah. So I think she was concerned about us giving up and our dreams or what we were
Ah,
doing
okay.
because she'd
Yeah.
become ill again, and that was her all over the back. But um, I kind of wish now I maybe hadn't listened to her and
Yeah.
just come home. Um, but shortly after that, when we found like sort of get spoken to and told the severity of it, I was lucky enough to be able to get special leave.
Oh,
So
good.
I was able to
Yeah.
go back to Glasgow and like basically care for my mum,
Right.
because my dad was working over in India at the time. Um, so he was finishing up everything. He's retired now, a civil engineer.
Ah,
Like
right,
so,
okay.
he just like was passing on information like and everything to sort before he came back.
What it was over.
Yeah, because his employer maybe wasn't so. Yeah,
Yeah.
understanding it's different, isn't it, for everybody? Um,
I think that's one of the hard
yeah.
things though, like different organisations have got different policies and it
Mm-hmm.
never fails to amaze me, do you know, the really galling situations that people just have to deal with that a wee
Mm-hmm.
bit of sympathy, compassion, a bit of empathy would really make a difference and it
Yeah,
feels like your employers could give you a bit of flexibility and say, look,
yeah.
take the time and go and be with your
Mm-hmm.
mum, but
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Uh-huh.
Mm.
And I'd say I became very when I looked after her, I became like very, I want to say stoic. I don't know if that's
Okay.
the right word.
Mm.
Um, and I don't know, I felt like, right, this is up to me. This is up to me to like do everything. And she's like, I obviously had conversations with a lot of conversations with my mum when it was just me and her
Mm.
at that point. But it felt dead short because it soon came to the point near the end where she just was so full of morphine and
Mm.
drugs to try and
Uh-huh.
stop her pain. Like I don't even know if she knew we were there or she wasn't able to talk back or anything. But by
Mm.
that point, she was in the hospice. Um, and I think something else when I think back on it all now is the importance of letting other people help you.
Ah, yes.
Um,
Yeah.
you're not alone. There'll be
Mm.
somebody. I know you can feel like quite alone, or it's as if I didn't want to admit to myself I couldn't cope with it, or
Mm.
like because I always remember some of our friends came in to help clean the house, and I felt really offended. And I
Ah,
was like,
okay.
"Is she? Why I can clean the house? I've like, like."
As if you're not doing it well enough or you're
As
not
if
keeping
I'm not
top of
doing it
things.
well enough, and it's all
Mhm.
these stupid things you think about that completely don't matter.
Mm. Mhm.
Yeah, and
Mhm.
but I think it's so important, like to let other people help you and actually tell the people you trust or know that like tell them how you're actually feeling and stop trying to pretend that you're okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I find
Uh-huh.
often like one of the things that I've found can be really helpful though is actually just to have some practical things that people can do for you, do you know, because they can't
Mhm.
kind of take that pain away. They can't
Mhm.
stop the situation hurting, but you know, if they can go out and pick up some shopping, then it gives you a bit of space to just be with your mum or just catch your
Uh-huh.
own breath for a while. So I love that
Mhm.
idea of like, I just let people in and let them
Mhm.
do a wee bit to help you.
Mhm. Yeah.
Mm.
And then I think after she passed, well, when I had those conversations with my mum, I always remember her saying at one point that I, she used to speak about like how I had a light and a strength in me that not everybody
Mm.
has.
Hmm.
That she knew I was the strong one and I had to look after my dad and my sisters. And I was like, I will, I will. And she
Mm.
went, no, I know you will. And I think going on to the next thing, like after she passed away, um, it was so strange, but it's as if obviously in the run up to it, especially like seeing my gran, like her mum and my grandpa, her dad, like I don't think I'd ever seen them cry before.
Okay, so they were still alive,
So
yeah.
that got,
Mm.
yeah, they were, yeah. So it was always upsetting, and like the nurses in the hospice used to cry. They were like angels, they really
Yeah.
were.
Hmm.
Um, but see that moment, like when you get that phone call. My dad was still at the hospital, thank goodness. But he phoned and says, right, you all need to get here now. And I think it was like 6 o'clock in the morning. And we were staying at my mum and dad's house. So me and my sisters got in and I drove, and I think I nearly crashed my car because my head like went right
Hmm.
into the back of somebody at one point, and
Hmm.
we got there, but she just passed away.
Hmm.
And it was like instantly when that happened, like it was this really weird thing where it felt dead surreal, and it's like I
Hmm.
sort of felt a bit frozen. And my sisters and my dad were like so obviously so upset and crying, but it was as if I couldn't cry.
Yeah.
And I started thinking, oh, did I not love my mum?
Oh.
Like, why am I not crying? And I think it was in that instant moment. One of her friends always said to me after it, she goes, but that was your body protecting
You're in shock.
protecting you.
Yeah.
And but then I like instantly went into this mode of, right, I need to look after everybody. I need to
Mm.
like take her place almost and be the one that
Yeah.
looks after everybody. And that's again another dangerous thing, I think,
It's a
because
huge
now,
responsibility, isn't it?
yeah,
Mm.
and you just get on with it and you just do it, but yet
Mm.
then you're blocking yourself from being able to grieve properly.
Yeah.
um, and I did cry at her funeral, but then right after, instantly, it's like I went back into this mode, like, right, you buck up, like,
Mm.
look after everybody else, because I'm the
Mm.
oldest as well. So
Right.
yeah, I think you automatically
That
feel,
responsibility again, yeah.
yeah. And I think my dad was that, it's that generation where my mum did everything for my dad. Like,
Mm. Hmm.
I don't know how he coped when he went to work abroad. Well, eventually she went out with him, but like he was like that where he didn't do any housework or cooking or anything like that. So
Yeah.
he was learning how to do all that, and
It's a
yeah,
huge adjustment, that, isn't it? You know,
yeah,
you're like, I have to learn all
yeah,
this
it is.
stuff. Mm.
And I always think the next day as well, like, see when you see the rest of the world carrying on,
Yeah.
I always remember that being really hard, because you think to yourself, my mum's just died. Why are
Yeah.
people going to Asda to get their shopping?
Yeah.
Why are people going to, like, it's a really weird feeling.
Yeah.
Um,
I
so
think you
yeah,
said something, I'm taking you back a wee bit here, Carrie, but you said something really important there about like when you were saying earlier on about that feeling of being frozen, and it just struck me as you were describing that moment where almost you can see everybody else getting really upset and doing what you would expect yourself maybe to do in that moment, and you just weren't. That
mm-hmm,
it strikes me that sometimes when it's a death that's kind of expected but also unexpected in a way, it's like we can put a pressure on ourselves that, well, we knew this was coming, we should be doing X, Y, and Z, and it's like it I think that's like a false economy. Like it doesn't make it
yeah,
easier just because you knew she was dying. There's still that sense of shock. There's still that disbelief. There's still that moment where you're
yeah,
just like, actually, the rug has been pulled out from under me. So I sometimes
yeah,
think people end up giving themselves a hard time that like, well, we knew it was happening and yet I still wasn't okay. And it's like, well,
mm-hmm.
it's your mum.
And yeah, because interestingly, like, I've been part or heard conversations with people talking about this and saying,
Mm,
not in relation to me, I might add, because
hmm.
I've just been like, they've maybe not known, or like, they've just been
That's been
talking
your
about
journey.
it in general, not in relation to my situation. And they'll discuss things like, oh, I mean, it must be better to know before
Mm,
somebody dies rather than it happen instantly. And I'm always like to myself, no, either way is horrific.
yeah,
Like, or either way is just as painful,
yeah,
because you still never know the moment exactly. And
yeah.
yeah, and don't get me wrong, I guess, like, there, if you do know, like, you can maybe try and do things or say things that you might, I
Have
guess
your
that there's
conversation.
that aspect of it that maybe gives you a slight advantage to,
Mm,
I don't know, I
hmm.
guess make amends if you needed to,
Hmm.
or
Yeah.
you do sort of have that. But I think it's, one way is not easier than the
No.
other. And I think you can sometimes feel, as you say, you go, God, at least I should be grateful that I knew and I had that time with my mum, where some people don't get that opportunity.
Mm,
Like, instantly, if it's something instant, yeah,
yeah.
it's,
Yeah.
yeah. So I just always think everyone's feelings are all and experiences are valid, and
Totally.
yeah,
Yeah.
and there can be a lot of opinions, and again, I think sometimes it can be people trying to help you, but they're maybe not
Yeah.
not being the most helpful. So it's just knowing that the way you feel is the way you feel, and it's right, like for you.
And
Yeah.
not having that hierarchy around like this is the better way of it happening and this is
Mhm.
harder, do you know, because you're so right that it's no better or worse, it's just different. And I totally take on board that point of like, well, if you know, at least you've got the opportunity perhaps to say some of the things you need to say goodbye, to make amends if there's been any kind of difficulties in the relationship. But I kind of
Mhm.
question as well how many people might have that opportunity but still no feel able to take it,
Able
do
to
you
do it.
know? So
Mhm.
yeah, I always think
Yeah.
it's you're right, everything and anything's valid when it comes to grief and there isn't a better or worse ultimately.
Mhm.
Mm.
Mhm.
What helped you in those kind of early days? Like how did you navigate them? I heard obviously that bit of you that was like, right, I'm going to just look after everybody, but how did you
Mhm.
how did you get through the first weeks and months?
I am, to be honest, I think a lot of it was, so at my mum's funeral, the minister, like we weren't brought up with religion at all. Um, but the we were from Lake Torrens, so see, and at
Mm.
the time it was a very small village. Now I think there's thousands of houses been built in the fields round about it, so
Right,
there's a
okay.
lot of people. But back then it was really quite small. So like we had the funeral, and the minister of the local church in Torrens, like he held it and everything, even though like we weren't part of the, I don't know, just say congregation, or we
Congregation.
didn't go.
Hmm.
um, and he like had this little these wee like note card things, and he said like that if people wanted to leave a message, and there was so many people at my mum's funeral, like they couldn't all
Wow.
fit in. And then see afterwards, like reading, I think 'cause she was a teacher and she was a supply teacher laterally, so like past colleagues she worked with, we get cards from like past students that had read, because we
Mm,
put it in the papers about her passing away. Because again, people still could put papers back
yep.
then, so yeah. um so some of the things that they'd written about my mum, and see, reading that, like, it was really really helpful,
Mm,
at knowing like the way she touched a lot of people's lives. And I always remember thinking, God, if I could be a quarter of the person my mum was, like I'd be doing well.
wow.
Because
Hmm.
when you heard what people, I know nobody likes to speak ill of the dead, but some of the things were really, really touching, like what they'd written. And so reading over those and remembering her
Yeah,
for all her good qualities. We all have good and bad. She had her always.
absolutely. Absolutely.
I think just remembering the person she was, and the happy memories, and
Yeah.
being able to talk. I'm lucky that I do too. So my dad very much closed off and didn't want to talk about her for a very, very long time, and we respected that. Um, but me and my sisters used to, we had each other to kind of talk things through, and that was really, really helpful. And my
Mm.
mum was very, very well. I think she was a hippie.
A
So
closet hippie.
she was very like she was quite into all her spiritual stuff and things like that. So yeah, there was like things that
Hmm.
that she taught us, like, you know, yeah, things I guess like meditation, or
Amazing.
like she was actually the one that taught me how to read tarot, which is what I
Wow,
do
right,
now.
okay, so this is where this came
So
from.
I think
Okay.
like, yeah, I think like when I look back now, I realise the amount she actually taught us and how to cope with difficult situations, and it's sort of.
Mm.
But I definitely think having my sisters helped. So I think, but again, it's about that support thing and letting people support you.
Yeah.
Um, what I will say in relation to that, though, I didn't allow myself to process it all properly, because about, I think it was about a year and a half to 2 years after she passed, I like had a complete meltdown,
Okay.
like crazy
Mm.
meltdown. where I was working at the time, I like just lost it with like one of the big bosses and called him I won't,
Expletives.
stormed out,
Wow.
got in my car, and there was a truck blocking the fence, and I just drove my car and grazed on the side of it.
Oh.
I was so angry. It was like all this
Mm.
anger, like suppressed anger, had just
Mm.
come out me, and it was triggered by the littlest thing. But I think looking back again now, I know what triggered it is because there was a young boy that worked in the office, and he just lost one of his parents to cancer and just found out his other parent had cancer.
Wow, that's
And
terrifying. Yeah.
everybody was all like, oh my God, like all around him and trying to do,
Mm.
and this is going to make me sound like a horrible, horrible, awful person.
Not at
But it's
all.
like something inside of me went, where were the people to look after me?
Yeah. What about me?
Like, where?
Mm.
So again, I don't know, it's such a mix of emotions.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
Grief, and some days you're okay, and other days you're not okay. And
Yep.
if I could say anything to anybody, is don't feel bad about the way.
Mm-hmm.
It's all right to feel angry. It's all right to feel guilty, and it's all right to,
And
yeah,
the power, I suppose, in recognising that we don't ever get done with grief when it's somebody that we've loved,
no,
somebody as
no,
fundamental as your mum. And it just strikes me that there were you like a year and a half down the line, and I can imagine that would have probably caught you by surprise in that moment. But it's like,
mm-hmm.
I'm guessing at that point you did a year and a half of just getting on with things, looking after everybody, just
Uh-huh.
keeping going, keeping going, keeping going, and then
Mm-hmm.
eventually that anger just came
Mm-hmm.
out of what felt like nothing to start with, but obviously
Uh-huh.
you could then
Yeah.
track it back to what it really was about.
Mm-hmm.
Mm,
And it makes you feel horrible because you think, oh, I shouldn't be.
yeah,
But again, it's that importance of getting support and allowing yourself, like, at first you might feel frozen and
yeah,
you're trying to get on with things, but it's realizing that you're not a robot
no,
or the bionic woman that can
yeah,
just, you can take and take and take, but you can only take so much, and then it's going to come out. And
yeah,
um, yeah, so it's so important, I think, to allow yourself, like, you do need time, stillness. You can't
yeah.
keep going. You can't, yeah, keep pushing yourself.
Yeah, and
Hmm.
that guilt and that shame that we sometimes feel when the big emotions do come out, it's
Yeah,
like that in itself can be so destructive that I always find myself in my work with my clients talking about compassion and empathy and just trying to extend those to ourselves in the way that we would do to anybody else in our world that was
yes.
going through this, but it's like we're so hard on ourselves and
Hmm.
I've got these really unrealistic expectations of like how we're supposed to be and how we're meant
Hmm.
to cope, and it's like if we could just cut ourselves a wee bit of slack, I think we could probably like make our
Hmm.
grief journey just a wee bit gentler on ourselves. But
Hmm.
yeah, it's these impossible standards of got to do
Yeah,
this, that, and the other, and can't feel anything. Everything's got to be all right, and it's God, it's
yeah,
tough when you lose somebody that's been so important in your life.
yeah. I
Yeah,
know, because I spoke to her nearly every day, I think.
yeah.
And when you had something wrong, I phoned my mum.
You go to your mum. Mhm,
She knew what to say and what
mhm,
to tell you to do. And to lose
mhm.
that, you're like, oh, I need to do
Yeah,
this on my own now. And
yeah.
again, I think something else that really helped me was um, writing a writing a letter to her.
Ah, okay. Uh-huh.
Um, because part of the anger, again, it feels horrible to say, but I'm going to say it because
Own it.
again, I
Yeah.
hope it helps somebody. Is
Mhm,
part of the anger was I was angry at her,
mhm.
angry at her for leaving,
Yeah.
which sounds crazy, but I was starting to not be able to cope. Like,
Mm.
doing everything, like looking after my dad and worrying about my sisters, and it was, I just felt like, how did she do this? Like,
Mm,
how did
mhm.
she manage to keep
Yeah.
everything? And I know one aspect of it was everybody was grieving, so they weren't maybe behaving and acting or like the way they maybe
Yeah.
normally would. But yeah, it was difficult, difficult to have all these people that kind of needed you all of a
Yeah.
sudden when you
Mhm.
weren't maybe used to it, and it did become. And because I didn't tell anybody, everyone thought she's fine.
Carrie's
Like,
fine. Yeah.
she's so resilient. She,
Mm.
like, that's what people would say to me. And then, but they were trying to say that to be nice and supportive, but it was making me think, well, I can't crack here.
You can't show what's going
I
on there.
can't
No.
crack here because
Hmm.
everyone's thinking, right, she's.
Hmm.
And you don't want to admit that you're not on top of things, I
Hmm.
think.
Hmm.
Do you not?
Especially when it's deemed to be such a good thing, isn't it? Of like, oh, look how
Mm-hmm.
resilient, like how well you're coping, and it's like,
Mm-hmm.
what if I'm just no coping? Do you know? Is it can that be all right for me just to say
Mm-hmm.
actually this is pretty shit and I'm really struggling right now?
Yeah, yeah. And people go, you're so strong. And it's like,
Mm,
sometimes you think to yourself, I'm tired of being strong.
yep,
I actually
yep,
just want to crumble and
yeah,
crawl up and hide in a corner.
yeah.
And, hmm
Can somebody just look after me for a bit?
yeah.
Hmm.
hmm
Mm,
So I think it's really important to, it's all, I guess it's all about being self-aware, isn't it?
yep.
Like noticing little
Hmm.
things like in your body or where you're feeling and paying attention to those and not ignoring it and
Hmm.
yeah,
Hmm.
no, it's
Something,
okay.
no, something I was going to ask about is that I know, like, I'm quite geeky when it comes to grief, and I know, like, I love understanding how the brain works. Like, it's not enough for
Hmm.
somebody just to tell me this is how it works. I'm like, well, why? Tell me the ins and outs. Let me
Yeah.
understand it. And I know that one of the kind of more modern theories of grief talks about the idea of like our continuing bonds to the person that's died. So that sense of like, how do you keep a sense of connection to that person as you're moving forward in your life, getting on with whatever normality looks like for you. So have you got a feeling of closeness to your mum? Like, do you still talk to her? Have you got a sense of connectedness to her?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh-huh. Um, Again, just through, I know not everybody would do this, just through practices I have, like
Hmm.
um I'll I use cards a
Mm.
lot. I've got a specific deck and I've actually got my mum loved Winnie the Pooh
Right, okay.
and because I do read tarot, like I got this Winnie the Pooh tarot deck.
Who knew that even existed, Carrie? Like,
Oh, there's a
who
tarot
knew?
deck for everything. I
I'm
swear to
learning here.
God, there's so many tarot decks. So as soon as I saw that, I went, I'm getting that, and that's going to be like my deck for my mum.
For your mum.
And so, like, I'll like talk to, I ask her advice through that, and I'll use that deck.
Nice. Hmm.
And I think you get a feeling. I think, but for people that don't read tarot, I think like see, and it sounds a bit crazy, but see just sitting quietly when there's no one else in the room or giving
Hmm.
yourself that space and just
Hmm.
speaking
Hmm.
to them.
Yep.
Um, or even closing your eyes and just feeling it's like you feel this support. It's really,
Beautiful.
and there's actually guided meditations out there, I think, to help people do this if
Mm.
they can't. But I think just sitting and remembering them and even talking to them, and
Yep.
again, if that feels weird, I guess writing
Writing it.
them
Yep.
because I've
No.
done all these. I've done all these things. Cards is what I use now, because I use them all the time. But I think that's important, actually,
Yeah.
very important to
Hmm.
keep that connection, to keep photographs and to bring them up. Like I know it can be upsetting and triggering sometimes, but even if it makes you all cry,
Yeah.
it it's like kind of cathartic in a way because
Hmm.
you're remembering them, and then a lot of times you won't. You'll laugh about
Hmm.
silly things they'd said or done, or and it's
Yeah.
keeping that memory alive. I think is really helpful, and
Yeah.
knowing that giving you that feeling that they're still there somewhere supporting you.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I think that's such a useful thing for people to hear and to know and to remember because again I often find that for people who are kind of starting to find their way in their grief and just trying to make sense of what life looks like without that person in it, I think unless you are quite a spiritual person, then there can be a sense of like that I'm going bonkers, like I'm talking to her when I'm cutting up the vegetables at night, and it's like it's fine. It's our way of like keeping that
Uh-huh.
bond to the person and I suppose when you were saying earlier on about all the beautiful things that your mum taught you, it's like you're really lucky that you've been left with all these lovely gifts that you can use in your life now that help you
Mm.
to remember her. But I suppose for people that maybe don't have that, it's thinking about the nice memories, the times they did have with the
Yeah.
person, the even I sometimes think even like when it comes to remembrance maybe on anniversaries or birthdays and things
Mhm.
like that, like having their favourite food or, listening to music that they liked or, it can be little things like that that just help us to feel that sense of closeness to them that,
Mhm.
sometimes as I say, it comes through that under the breath conversation of like, yeah, actually I do talk to her when I go to bed at night.
Mhm.
It's like that's fine. Do you know, if that's how we
And I
feel
think
close
it's
to
that,
them, then
yeah.
brilliant.
And interesting enough, this isn't mine, but somebody like I work alongside lost her husband shortly after COVID, and she just went on a cruise at the start of the year, and she took a picture of him. She's like
Mm-hmm.
that. I took him on the cruise, and she forgot him, but she got him back.
To get left in the cruise
And
ship.
she said, I left him in the cruise. But like she was saying how her and her friends were like they would go, right, we're away to do this today and talk to him and like she's like, I know it sounds completely like we're loony. She said,
Not
but
at
it made me
all.
feel better and it made the way her friend was just kinda, yeah, doing it as
Yeah.
well.
Mm-hmm.
Like, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I know you can maybe think everyone's got different beliefs around these sorts of things,
Yeah.
haven't they? But there's
Yeah.
always a way that you can, and as you say, even if it is doing something special when it's their birthdays or even at Christmases or things like having a wee thing for them, like
Yeah.
yeah, a wee remembrance. And
Mm-hmm.
again, yeah, sometimes you might it depends how everyone's feeling, isn't it? Like at
Mm-hmm.
the time, but it can get upsetting.
Mm-hmm.
But again, that helps you, I think, with your grief.
Yeah.
It's letting stuff out that's obviously in that should come out. So
Mm-hmm. Even just saying their names, I sometimes think there's something quite cathartic. Like
mhm.
once all of the kind of, I suppose all the faff round about the death has passed, once the people stop
Yeah.
visiting and the cards
Oh, it's
stop
all a
coming.
time thing. Yeah, yeah.
I think sometimes then it's like actually having conversations where you can remember and talk about them and say their name and I sometimes think that can bring a lot of light to people's grief because after
Mhm.
time has passed there is that kind of stigma of like is this all right for me still to be talking about it? Like can I still be feeling sad even though we're 6 months into it? And it's like, God,
Mhm.
absolutely, talk
Yeah,
about them,
because it
say their
doesn't go
name.
away.
No.
It never goes away,
Mm.
especially when it's such a, I can't think of the word, somebody that's so been so like instrumental. Like
Yeah.
uh, sometimes I'll hear a song, like a song my mum used to always listen to, and it'll maybe come on the
Yes.
radio, or I'll hear it and I'll get upset.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and you're like really upset, like that ugly
Mm-hmm.
crying, can't
Mm-hmm.
breathe.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, yeah. Um, but then other things, like I went and volunteered with Macmillan for many years.
Oh
Once
wow.
I was
Yeah.
ready, I couldn't do
Mm-hmm.
that straight away. That was
Mm-hmm.
after, about 5 or 6 years after her passing. But um, yeah, to give back somehow, like, and I actually found that very, very difficult. There was some days I come in from that and I was a mess.
Oh,
Not
I
in
can
front of the
imagine.
people because you were there to
Yeah.
support them, but coming home afterwards and you're going, oh God, can I do this? But for me, that it felt right, and it's something that I
Mm.
wanted to do. That's not, again, not for everybody
No,
because I
no.
didn't go back. Yeah, so yeah, it's it's. I think it's, yeah, it never goes away, and it's all right for it not to go away. Like as you
Yeah.
say, like some people might think, and sometimes you might hear from people like, "Oh, that was ages ago." Like,
Mm.
are you not? Yeah, I think until you've been through it, like
Hmm.
you don't fully understand. Like, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I think sometimes that's where like those I know before we started recording, we were chatting about sometimes the things that people say that maybe are quite
Mhm.
insensitive, and I think sometimes that's where they come from. Do you know, it's like
Uh-huh.
until you've walked in your shoes, and even if it's somebody else, like in your case, even somebody else has maybe had an experience of losing their mum, like they haven't lost your mum. They didn't have the same relationship as you had to your
Exactly.
mum, do you know, and it's like
Exactly.
people can try and understand, but I think sometimes the seemingly insensitive comments are coming from people that are well-meaning, but they've not lived it
Yeah.
themselves. They've not had that closeness of
Yeah.
relationship to really feel that enormity of grief.
Hmm. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. I think it's very individual
Mm.
and it'll even be different for my sisters and my
Yeah,
dad. Do you know, like
yeah,
from what it was for me. It's
mm,
yeah.
yeah,
And again, I guess that is another lesson is that everyone copes and does things differently and you need
yeah.
to let them. Um, because that thinking about that now is how me and my we all kind of dealt with that differently,
In your own way. Yeah.
in our own ways.
Mm.
Um, and again, I think really going back is to that support thing and letting people help you,
Mm-hmm.
especially if you're fortunate to have close family still. Do you know
Mm-hmm.
after
Mm-hmm.
after the passing or the grief that you've got that even friends or really really close people like just to let them know how you actually are and
Mm.
not the how are you? I'm
I'm
fine.
fine.
I'm
Yep.
fine.
It's the standard
Yeah.
answer, isn't it? It's like, yep,
Mhm.
everything's fine. And it's like, is it
Uh-huh.
really? You know,
Yeah. And to
it
know
feels like
that
that's
there's
kind of the
every
thread
emotion.
that's, yeah, I was just gonna say that's the thread that feels like it's run through all of it is like that individuality of grief and
Hmm.
actually just being able to like not only ask for support when we need it, but also allowing ourselves to have comfort in the things that we find comfort in, you know, whatever those
Hmm.
practices, beliefs are, you
Hmm.
know, it's like there's
Yes.
different things that are going to matter to different people.
Uh, and to forgive yourself.
Mm,
Forgive yourself if you start thinking, oh, I did this or said that to them and I shouldn't have, and or I'm feeling angry at them and I shouldn't, and like
mm,
there's a lot of beating yourself up, I think, because you think there's a textbook way to handle everything. Because
yeah.
again, until you've experienced it, you do kind of think like, I don't know. I guess it's for
Mm,
you when you read stories or watch movies and things like that, and you think, right, this is what it's like, and it's
yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
uh,
And it's, do you know, I'm smiling, so I'm thinking, I suppose that's the whole reason we're here and we're having this conversation
mm-hmm,
and that this podcast even exists. It's like
yeah,
so often I hear it from people of like they keep shoulding themselves of I should feel
yeah,
this and I should be doing that. And it's like, where are you getting that from? Like who is it that's wrote this rule book that, you know, tells us we should be doing this, that or the other? And I think there's real power in these conversations where we get into just the
yeah,
real rawness of like actually
mm-hmm,
grief is messy and it's
mm-hmm,
multifaceted and we can't control it. You can't set your watch to when it's going to show up. You know, it's so
oh,
unique and so individual that
mm-hmm,
you just need to ride the waves of it, I suppose, and yeah, hopefully do that in a way that feels supported by whoever you're fortunate enough to have round about you.
yeah,
Mm.
definitely,
Thank you so much for this conversation, Carrie. This has been, yeah, it's been really quite, I think we've touched into some really helpful things today, and I hope that other people listening to it find
yeah,
benefit in it as well. I don't doubt that they
I
will.
hope
And
so.
I want to say thank you for sharing your lovely mum with us too. It's been nice to kind of get to know a wee bit about her and her life and yeah, that journey that you've been on since her passing as well. So thank
Yeah,
you for
no
being
problem,
with us. I
no
suppose just
problem.
to finish off our episode as well, if you have been listening and you found this useful, please do consider sharing it if you think there's maybe somebody that would benefit from listening along as well. Around Facebook and Instagram, and I'm on at Continuum Counselling on both of them. Carrie, if people did want to perhaps reach out to you, if there's any kind of yeah people that want to kind of get in touch, how would they do that?
I have so my website for tarot reading and self-care things is just sageinthesky.com, and I am on that's got the email, you can email from that,
Perfect.
and I'm on Instagram, which is just at sage underscore in the underscore sky. Yeah, so
Amazing.
if I could ever help anyone, even just having a chat or that's maybe gone through just gone through something similar,
Mm,
or even not just, yeah, I'm totally open to that, because like I say, the support and helping each other's important these days, I
definitely.
think. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. And your business is incredibly wonderful as well, so it's
thank
definitely
you.
worth a wee look. I've been fortunate obviously to know a lot about what you do at Sage in the Sky and obviously know you through the Glasgow Girls Club. So we'll link to your contacts in the show notes as well. So if anybody does want to get in contact, they'll be able to pick them up from there. So
Okay,
yeah, just remains for me to say a final thank you to obviously Carrie, our lovely guest today, and thank you to you for listening along. And yeah, I look forward to seeing you in future episodes.